We ready to go?
Any are you?
Okay, we are now recording. We can start the meeting, Dale.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I'd like to do a call of order of the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County Regional Road Impact Fee Technical Advisory Committee meeting. Today is Thursday, July 29th, 2021. The time is 8:34 p.m. Leanne, can we do a roll call, or Yini?
Guinea, you got it?
Got it. Here we go. Alex Velto. Amy Cummings.
Here.
Brian Stewart.
This is Dale Keller in for Brian Stewart.
Jim Rundle.
Here.
John Krompatic.
Here.
John Erickson.
Present.
Kelly Mullen. Greg Knudsen.
Here.
Larry Chesney. Mike Michelle. Mitchell Fink. Randy Walter.
Here.
Shelley Reed. Ted Erkin.
Here.
And for the RTC, I show Leanne Olivas,
Here.
Adam Spear,
Here.
Daniel Dunges,
Here.
Hannah Yu, and if I missed anyone, that's all I show. Please let me know.
Yeah, here.
And this is Kelly Mullen. I just joined.
Thank you.
Come here.
Thank you.
Yini, do you have a quorum?
Yes, we do.
Great. Thank you for that. So moving on to agenda item number 2, public comment. Yini, did we receive any public comment for the meeting?
No public comment was received.
And Leanne, nothing in the room?
No public comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, agenda item number 3, approval of the agenda. May I have a motion for the approval of the agenda?
Move to approve.
Okay. Move to approve, John Erickson. So in the room, was that
Craig.
Craig? Thank you, Craig. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Hi.
Motion passes. The agenda is approved. Moving forward to the item number 4, the consent items is the approval of the meeting minutes. It's the only one on the consent. May I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Is that Randy or is that Craig? Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second, Craig.
Perfect. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Moving on to agenda item number 5, point 1. Acknowledge receipt of report of the RRIF General Administrative Manual update and the proposed revisions to the GAM. I will lead this topic for discussion, and I'm going to share my screen. Yenny, can you allow my screen to be shared? Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so it's been a while since we met, since May, so I thought it'd be a good way to start off on what we covered from the May RRIF TAC meeting, just to recap and follow up as it relates to the 7th edition GAM. The first thing, that the major topic of that meeting was the fee schedule, and here's the recap of that fee schedule. Since that time, there has been no changes or updates to the proposed fee schedule. And we'll talk about some of the items that questions and some follow-up items that came out of that meeting we'll discuss here today. So as I said, the first one, the fee schedule, there was no changes to the proposed fee schedule. In regards to the fee difference between the 7th edition and the 6th edition for residential single-family unit, we'll discuss that in further detail and provide further background in this presentation. Also discussed was strategies for affordable housing. After meeting with the local RRIF administrators of Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County, we decided the best path forward, that we need more information and we need further analysis and studies to determine the best path forward to look at affordable housing. This will be considered for the 8th edition, if not sooner, as we go through the next update, and we'll provide more updates and follow-ups as we after the approval of this 7th edition. And lastly, we had a very thorough presentation by our RTC planning on trip length comparison, and that detailed the difference between land use forecasting, plan improvements, and the travel demand model, and those inputs between the 2050 RTP and the 2040 RTP. So I'd like to spend a minute of this presentation to further explain the fee difference for a single family or single unit residential land use. If you recall the fee increase for this developmental type was greater than the majority of the other proposed RRIF fee schedule. In the north, it was roughly about 7.2% increase, and in the south, it was about 6.2%, respectively. And this increase is directly related to the increase of total number of vehicles in Washoe County. The total number of vehicle data is collected by the U.S. Census Bureau with the American Community Survey, or ACS. And this helps, this is straight from the website, helps local officials, community leaders, and businesses understand the changes taking place in their communities. It is the premier source for detailed population and housing information about our nation. So the 7th edition used the most recent updated information, which was the 2019 American Community Survey, and the 6th edition used the 2016 American Community Survey. For us to calculate the average weekday trip ins, these tables show kind of the first steps along that process for that calculation. The top table is the direct output from that 2019 survey. You see it's broken up to number of vehicles available, from no vehicles available to 1, 2, and 3 plus more. They provide that estimate, and all those estimates, they have a margin of error. There's also another column for percentages. It's all within about 1% or 1.5% of margin of error. Next, the middle table, the RTC determines vehicles per land use. So we removed the vehicles for 2 or more unit land use, and the bottom table shows the vehicles available for residential single units. To help kind of further explain the change of that fee increase, as the fundamental change is with the input of roughly about 3% of increase of total number of vehicles for the single unit between the 16 and 19 study. The next step of this process is using the ITE, or Institute of Transportation Engineers, trip generation manual to calculate the average weekday trip ins for residential use. And they do it in 2 ways through this fitted curve equation as shown. So first one is based on persons, number of persons living in Washoe County. And the second one is based off of the vehicles available. And best practices, and that what we've done and previously for all these RRIF iterations have been using the average to calculate to get that single number for a total number of average trip ins. So you see in that bottom of the table here, that difference is roughly 12.5%. So it has an exponential effect on the total number of trips per our calculation. And lastly, we take the total trip ins. We're then divided by the total number of a single unit structures in Washoe County to calculate the average trip ins. As shown on that top table, the increase is roughly about 6% from the 6th edition. And so this increase of 6% is carried through the remaining of those calculations, including our trip adjustments as shown on that bottom table for the final VMT and RRIF fee for single unit development type. So I know this was a kind of a tedious and deep dive into the fee development for single family housing. I guess my hope by providing this detail builds a little bit more confidence in our schedule and our fee schedule. Also, to note, you see that note in the middle of the screen, if we were to use the standard ITE trip rate for single units, it's roughly about 9.44. And that's another 4.5% increase between what we're proposing to use of the 7th edition. So this is a very specific relative use of trip calculations for single family residents or units in Washoe County. And once again, this is what we've been doing previously in our past editions. So switching gears to the revisions of the RRIF General Administrative Manual. This is actually a text. It was included as part of your board pack or your RTC, excuse me, your RRIF TAC packet. As part of the 7th edition update of the RRIF GAM, our intent was to find opportunities to improve clarity and conformity with the administration of this manual, and the substantive changes in the final draft of the 7th edition RRIF GAM includes 4 main areas of focus. The first one is the conformity of terms and references. We'll touch upon those in a second. Consistency between key terms and definitions. We wanted to outline a clear appeals process and provide a little bit better definition and sandbox to provide clarity to the local RRIF administrators, RTC RRIF administrators, and any fee payer or applicant through that process. And lastly is to clarify and more align the special request for a capital improvement. So if somebody comes up and wants to include a project in our CIP, what is that role and how does that process work? So the first one here on conformity of terms and references. So we made a concerted effort to ensure defined terms were correctly referenced. And in addition, we removed any erroneous citations or either update or remove. Here's an example of this text cleanup section, section 2, related to administration and organization. You see at the top of the screen, for example, the words impact fee program were crossed out and replaced with a defined term RRIF program. So this is an example. We just want to be consistent. And if somebody was taking a look at what is an impact fee program, we can now define, hey, we have a defined term on it. We can look at the definitions and you can clearly determine what the intent was for that section. Another major cleanup item was related to the term RRIF fee. Throughout the previous document in the 6th edition, this term was presented in many different ways and fashions, such as fee or regional road impact fees or impact fee funds. So we went through and defined the term RRIF fee and be consistent with our approach throughout the manual to highlight what that term would be. Next is consistency between key terms. This was mainly focused to ensure we have consistency between NRS, the RRIF GAM, as well as our RRIF Capital Improvement Plan or CIP. And the key terms were revisited guide, both the RTC and all the local agencies for the administration of the RRIF program. And was focused on this hierarchy as shown here. We start with the RRIF network and work our way down. And previously we've received a lot of questions or complaints to determine what was eligible, what was in or without, and how are we being consistent with these definitions. So this was our approach and attempt to provide this clarity. So I'm going to start from the top of how we went about this and highlight some of the changes between the 6th and 7th. So in the 6th edition, the RRIF network tried to capture it all, from the network of roads to the new roadways proposed by private developers for eligibility. And so with the 7th edition, we tried to provide a simplified hierarchy and straightforward approach. So you see on the top, we just define the RRIF network as the existing or planned arterial or collector streets and roads to meet their criteria specified in the RRIF CIP. So that brings it down, all right, what's in the RRIF CIP? As we start to look at the RRIF CIP, this definition has not changed. So it's still the plan required by the NRS to update and adopt the connections with this manual. So what you'll see is we've further defined the requirements and updated the RRIF CIP and the text in the RRIF CIP and included the specific requirements. And then also we described the methodology to satisfy NRS. The RRIF TAC doesn't have this document, and this is one we're finalizing with our consultant and will be presented at the August meeting for the final text to kind of talk through that methodology. And this is where we describe that how we're satisfying NRS through that calculation and through the RRIF fee schedule that has been previously presented. Next, we discuss about clarifying the RRIF capital improvements. And we separated the eligibility requirements. Once again, this definition on the 6th edition tried to put everything together with eligibility. So it wasn't all in one place. So this capital improvements just focused on what that means when we have something in our CIP. So this is street projects and facility expansions that's in the CIP necessitated by and contributed to new development in each service area. And this we want to capture also the last sentence here, site-related improvements are not RRIF capital improvements. So these terms were scattered throughout different definitions and we put it all into one. And lastly, the biggest complaint that we received from the private sector, from developers, as well as I think all of us together, what is eligible for an offset waiver agreement? Before it was what was not eligible, so it's kind of a backwards way of defining it. So we just simplified and said, here's what the things are eligible. And that goes through A through E. And this hasn't changed. This was already included in our definition, but we just added to one area to make sure it's clear. Once again, simplified. We discussed a hierarchy in our process. The third thing in the GAM that's changed is the appeals process. And like I said, we further refined that sandbox and understood what the applicant needs to do and what needs to be done for the appeals and what is I would say, what could be appealed and provide very clarity of what that is. So first, this notice of appeal. So I'll read through these first two bullet points. A fee payer or applicant affected by a final administrative decision of the local RRIF administrator or the RTC RRIF administrator may appeal the decision. The RTC RRIF administrator will consider an appeal of a decision of a local RRIF administrator. So if there's a decision made by a local administrator, the RTC RRIF administrator will have the opportunity to consider that appeal. And from there, the appeals committee will consider an appeal of a decision of the RRIF administrator. So if it goes past the RTC RRIF administrator, the applicant would have an opportunity to appeal to this newly formed appeals committee. And this appeals committee is made of, we added this as a key term in the definitions, a committee of 3 subject matter experts composed of 1 representative of each of the participating local governments. The local RRIF administrator of each participating local government shall select its representative. What this does, and we'll move to the next slide too, it just provides a clearer process. Hopefully it doesn't provide, what's the best term I would want to say? It's a very straightforward approach. And in this appeals and in the notification for appeals, it defines what needs to be presented and discuss what exactly the applicant would be appealing. So furthermore, the appeals to appeals committee, we further define this in this section 12 here, is the appeals committee shall have the power to affirm or reverse the decisions being appealed. In no event should the appeal committee have the authority to negotiate the terms of corrective action. So either they say, yes, applicant, you are correct, and we will overturn it, or we'll affirm the decision, but they don't have any opportunity to do something in between. And lastly, this is important to note that the RTC RRIF administrator shall have the right, the advice of our legal counsel, to reject any findings of the appeals committee and refuse to carry out that corrective action. So if there's something that legally presents any more an atmosphere, our legal counsel can talk more about this. Exposure to the RTC or our local agencies that would consider that, we do have a right to overrule that, and then we'd start that litigation process. Last thing on the changes here is the request for special capital improvement request. So if a private entity or developer wants to include a project in the CIP, and this has been discussed previously, I know the City of Sparks came across this with the development in the City of Sparks. It wasn't very clear, and we wanted to understand exactly the process to do so. And we went down a few rabbit holes to say, what is the repercussions by adding or deleting projects and so forth. So the 6th edition allowed the RTC RRIF administrator was further authorized to make changes to this RRIF CIP. However, there are some statutes in NRS to say, well, if you change to the CIP, then you need to reflect your fee, and we kind of just batted that around. Internally is with our consultant support as well. So we're proposing in the 7th edition that the RTC RRIF administrator prepares the appropriate modifications for a RRIF CIP for adoption by each of the local jurisdictions and the RTC board. So the same process that we'd go through for any of our updates. As you all know, we are required to do an update of the RRIF game every 2 years for that CIP if there's anything that changes. So that process, and as you well know in this committee, it takes time to get this through, and we can discuss this in more detail. There's questions by the committee. So next steps, based on today's meeting, we'd like to come back to this RRIF TAC meeting to do a final presentation of the complete packet of the RRIF GAM and the RRIF CIP that does include everything packed together as a text and request recommendation for adoption, so we can move this forward, as you see from the schedule, to September to the RTC board, and then thereafter to the planning commissions, and then to the 2 hearings to the city councils and the board of county commissioners. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
I have one, Dale.
Is that you, John Kropotnik?
Jim Rundle.
Oh, Jim.
Thanks, Dale. My question back on your slide regarding the RRIF appeals committee. I think it's well written. Because there's a RRIF administrator at each local, local jurisdiction, should that person be allowed to be on the appeal committee?
Sorry, I was muted. That's a very good question. I think we left it open-ended enough, but the intent was the local RRIF administrator to appoint another person. Adam, feel free to weigh in what your thoughts are to that question as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good question too. I think what we were trying to avoid was having a situation where you had a decision maker who was then hearing an appeal of their own decision. And so that's, I think, the way that we structured it to avoid that, but it could be worth looking at closer.
And potentially it would, I think that intent's appropriate, but potentially it says a committee of the 3 subject matter experts, 1 representative of each participating local government that does not include the local RRIF administrator. But you also may want to, we may want to identify, let's say it's the Sparks appeal that gets to the appeal committee. Do you want the county and Reno's RRIF administrator on the appeal board? I like this intent. I think there could just be some clarifications to it so that the appointees, it's very clear who can be appointed to them, and there's not a conflict. We haven't used the appeal. We haven't had to go here, but you never know when we will, and it'll just be clear to whoever's here at that time regarding staff.
I think that makes sense, and we can look closer at that and see if we can kind of refine it.
Is there any other comment on this regarding this matter from the committee?
Neil, this is John Erickson. Hey, could you go to the eligible slide, the items that would be eligible for RRIF waivers? You know, the one thing, how are we going to break out the calculation? So if, let's say, for example, you have a 4-lane facility. So obviously the two inside lanes would not be eligible, but then, you know, with regards to curb, gutter, sidewalk, median, how would that be broken out? You know, is the full, you know, would sidewalk on both sides, the curb and gutter on both sides, as well as the median all be RRIF waiver, or RRIF waiverable? Or is there some calculation that says, okay, one side of curb and gutter, one side of the sidewalk, a portion of the median? I think that there needs to be some clarification on how that calculation would be developed.
And I would maybe suggest too, we would not get in those type of details, John, for the fact that there might be, for example, some type of roadway section that each of the jurisdictions would like to see, regardless if it is if we're going from a new roadway section versus a widening section, of what that structure, what that cross section would look like. If that complete street element that is condition of that development would include, let's just say, a raised median and landscaping in the center versus even curb and gutter for that matter. So I would recommend maybe handling it on a basis by basis per agreement or for the application, and maybe that just needs to be hashed through the negotiations of each of the offset agreements.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I just have a general comment. This is Randy. I got the highlight strikeout version of the GAM yesterday. I obviously haven't had time to go through it and look at it. I'd like to have some time, as I did during the last session of going through and being able to identify some questions and some comments on the GAM. Hopefully we'll have that opportunity. It would be probably beneficial to the group if we could do something prior to the next meeting to clear up some of the, any problems we have or any discussion that we have prior to that. But that's really kind of your call, folks. But you guys have obviously had more time to read it than I have. So I would like the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, this is Dale. I'm happy to do what the committee would like. If we want to have an interim meeting here early August or have 2 meetings in August to talk through this. I'm also happy to meet on one-on-one or in smaller groups to discuss these changes as you have the opportunity to go through that. Whatever the committee would like to do, we are able to commit to that.
Hey, this is John Erickson. Randy, what would it take time-wise for you to review and then have Dale set a meeting up with interested parties to discuss this?
Well, I'd like to have at least a couple of weeks. What do you think?
So the week of would the week of August, what is that, August 16th? Would that give you enough time?
Sure, that gave me enough time. And I think we've already got another meeting set up for next week to answer some questions I had from the previous meeting. So that'll work out fine as well.
Dale, does that work for you?
It does, yeah. We'll be able to have, would you, just make sure I'm understanding, would you like to have a RRIF TAC that week meeting of the 16th, or you just want to have a small group? Or
My suggestion would be is that whoever would like to participate in a question and answer session, I'm of the opinion that I understand the process that you went through, Dale. And so it would be just available to the group, and whoever would like to go in and ask questions, and that would be my suggestion, is just to set up just a kind of a question and answer session, and whoever wants to join in can join in.
I'm going to second John. It is a Krompotic, John Erickson's suggestion, a little bit less formal, and drill down on this on a Q&A basis. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounded like a good process from my perspective too.
Hey Dale, this is Leanne. Just something to consider though, that depending on the small group, the number of people, if it's considered a public meeting, we've got to follow open meeting law.
Understood, and
how formal it is and how many.
Correct. I'll work with Adam in making sure that we comply with open meeting laws when it's appropriate, and what the size of the group would be for that Q&A session. So
I'll make it easier for you, Dale. Krompotic again. If I'm the guy that kicks you over the limit to force a public meeting, I'll bow out just to make this. I think there's a lot of value to what's been suggested, and do it informally. So we could probably manage that on a cooperative volunteer basis. Thank you.
thank you, John. Any other discussion?
Dale, you may have touched on it and I missed it on your slide regarding the average daily trips for single family residents had gone up from the last edition to this edition. This one, it's 9.04, and the last one was 8.56. Did you touch on why the data reflects that now?
I did, and I can just reiterate that to you as well. It's on actually the previous slide. It's all related to the 6% here. It's related to, I'm gonna go back one slide, 2 slides here. It goes back to first the number of vehicles available. And this calculation, roughly less than 3% increase of the vehicles here. And that has an exponential impact based off the calculations of the ITE formulas, up to 12. And then when we do the total last one, when we take the total trips, the over 1 million total trips, and we divide it by the total number of units within Washoe County, that gets that 6% increase of this 9.04. So it has a direct relationship to the increase of vehicles between the 16th survey, 2016, and 2019 survey.
Okay. And then you were the single unit, that kind of makes some sense. But if they're doing a multi-family project, you won't be using that same number.
It has a separate calculation. We do go through a very similar exercise that is specific to Washoe County. We don't use the standard IT trip rate for multifamily. We go through a very similar exercise, and this is how we get to the VMTs for multi-unit. But as you can see, this didn't have that big variance that we saw on the single family.
Okay. And how did you determine the available vehicles?
Through the survey. So it was a direct output from the American Community Survey that the U.S. Census Bureau puts on.
Would it make any sense to tie it with through like a DMV analysis on registrations?
Good question. I don't have a good answer for you. We can take that question back to our consultant, Tish Bias, and see what's been used around the country. But this is the best practices and being consistent with our previous determination of vehicles. Okay.
That makes sense. I thought, I don't know that I'm set on it. It was just another a component we could validate the numbers with, potentially a DMV saying, yeah, here's what we have registered, and the last year and a half, that those may be bogus numbers because of the number of cars purchased that weren't registered because the DMV was closed. So that may not work for the 7th edition anyway.
And then also another thing to consider, we might have more vehicles because you have registration for commercial use as well. I'm not sure if we're able to tease that information out, or rental cars and so forth. So this vehicle is available, has a direct correlation to housing units.
And it's best practice. So that makes sense to me. Thank you, Dale.
Mm-hmm. Any further questions? All right. May I have a motion?
Yeah, this is Kelly. Motion to accept report.
I'm gonna second it.
Motion for Kelly, second by John Kropotnik. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Moving forward to agenda item number 6, member announcements and updates. Any information or future topics for future agenda items for discussion? Hearing none, no action is needed on this item. We'll move forward to agenda item number 7, public comment. Yenny or Leanne, any other public comment received?
No public comment received on this one.
None in here either, Joe.
Thank you, Leanne. Last agenda item, number 8, adjournment. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Meeting is now adjourned. It is 9:12 a.m. Randy and Craig, thanks, Kelly. Randy and Craig, I'll come over to the room and say hi.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you all.
Dale, are we gonna have a quick chat?
Yeah, can you give me till 12 or 9:30? Does that work?
Yep. Yeah, it does.
Okay, great. I'll send a quick Zoom invite to both of you.
Okay, thanks, Dale.
Thanks.
He'll get back because Tony's available. Or, let's see.